everybody, and welcome to another edition of NBP Hot Seat, where we dive into critical discussion shaping the future of nuclear energy worldwide. I'm your host today, 𝘮𝘲𝘴𝘪𝘁, and today we are thrilled to have three distinguished guests from Hunton: George Borovas, the head of nuclear, and his team members Ina and Colleen. Our focus today is in the international implications of the recent US executive orders, which outline an ambitious plan to expand US nuclear capacity from 100 gigawatts to 400 gigawatts by 2050 and promote American nuclear exports. We'll explore Hunton's perspectives on the opportunities, partnerships, and diplomatic initiatives stemming from these EOs. So let's get started with George. George, the recent EOs, as I mentioned earlier, has outlined a 25-year plan to significantly expand US nuclear energy capacity, targeting an increase from approximately 100 gigawatts to 400 by 2050, while also promoting American nuclear exports. In your opinion, what are the most significant opportunities you see arising from this ambitious strategy? George, please.
Thank you very much, 𝘮𝘲𝘴𝘪𝘁. Indeed, it's an ambitious strategy, and it's something that's probably going to redefine the whole U.S. nuclear industry. As you know, the U.S. was one of the leaders of the development of nuclear power technology, but over the past few decades, especially after 3 Mile Island, the U.S. domestic industry started lagging behind. And we certainly do not see the U.S. being very visible in exports. With this announced strategy and these executive orders, I think there's going to see a rebirth, reinvigoration of the U.S. domestic nuclear industry by building more nuclear power plants, which are going to be needed because there's going to be so much need for power use, mainly driven by hyperscalers, data centers, and companies like that. Which is of course, going to have another effect. It's going to create a stable supply chain because there are going to be new orders for nuclear power plants. So the domestic supply chain in the United States is going to be recreated. And of course, there's the international component where there's a lot of effort from the US government to support exports and to look at the international marketplace as a very important component of the US nuclear strategy because of the geopolitical issues that come along with US nuclear exports.
Fantastic. Thanks for setting the stage, George. I think this gives us a great sense of the potential global impact of these EOs. Let me draw in Colleen to the discussion. Colleen, the US, as mentioned earlier, aims to achieve 400 gigawatt by 2050, and this could potentially open doors for collaboration. Now, how can international companies engage with US firms under these EOs, in particular in emerging nuclear markets? Colleen, please.
Thank you, 𝘮𝘲𝘴𝘪𝘁. So along with the domestic deployment of U.S. nuclear technologies, the executive orders also emphasize international deployment of those technologies and capabilities. And the orders provide a 3-part framework to enable engagement between U.S. firms and international companies in the emerging nuclear markets. So first, looking at the government level, and my colleague Ina will speak to this in more detail, but the orders set the foundation for requiring the signing of several new and then renewing existing 123 agreements. And these 123 agreements are between U.S. government and foreign governments. They get that name because they're authorized under Section 123 of the U.S. Atomic Energy Act. And that section, that act, generally requires conclusion of a peaceful nuclear cooperation agreement for significant transfers of nuclear equipment or materials from the United States. So that's your first step. And these agreements then provide the foundation on which 2 countries can, and the companies within those countries, can engage in nuclear safeguards discussions, technical exchanges, and scientific research. The second part of the framework is at the industry level. And the orders specifically emphasize increased participation in trade missions And these trade missions are opportunities for direct interaction and collaboration between U.S. companies in the nuclear industry and their counterparts in the foreign country. So the trade missions can happen one of two ways. You can either have a U.S. delegation made up of agency officials, government officials, nuclear technology providers, and representatives from the industry more broadly that travel together to the host country, or you can have a reverse trade mission where it's a delegation from the foreign country back to the United States. And multiple federal agencies are involved in these programs, so you will see involvement from Department of State, Department of Commerce, and of course the Department of Energy. And these are typically carried out with a lot of coordination and collaboration with the Nuclear Energy Institute. And like I mentioned, you'll see meetings between the corresponding agencies, government officials, and it does enable that direct interaction between regulators, technology providers, major component suppliers. And these are the first initial steps towards beginning the development of a new nuclear project in the relevant country. The third part of this framework then is the financing. And the executive orders expressly call for the leveraging of several agencies within the United States to provide direct financial support. This includes U.S. Export-Import Bank, the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, or DFC as it's more commonly known, and the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, so USTDA. All of them have different financial products that can be used at different stages of development of a nuclear project, and all are called to utilize those products to benefit the development of a new nuclear project in various countries, or nuclear projects, plural. Let's see, specifically, and then also wanted to speak to another part of the executive orders that, in addition to leveraging direct U.S. involvement, via Exim Bank, USTDA, and DFC, it also calls for leveraging U.S. participation in multilateral development banks to support client country access to financial and technical assistance in the development of new nuclear. And specifically want to refer to the recent announcement by the World Bank, which is making a lot of headlines, to end their ban on funding nuclear projects. And they have expressly stated their intent to support efforts to extend the life of existing plants, as well as to accelerate the deployment of small modular reactors, SMRs, and microreactors in developing countries. And they followed this up then with an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, that was signed with the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, later that same month, to support the safe, secure, and responsible use of nuclear energy in developing countries. So in summary, we see international companies engaging with U.S. firms under these executive orders, particularly in emerging nuclear markets, via the government-to-government support under the 123 agreements, the multi-agency supported trade missions, and also the financing support from Exim Bank, USTDA, DFC, and now from multilaterals.
Fantastic. That's a really interesting perspective on the upcoming potentials and also on fostering partnerships, Colleen. I guess it really highlights the collaborative potential in these emerging markets. Now, if I could draw Ina into the conversation, Ina, speaking of opportunities to engage with U.S. firms, the executive's orders emphasize aggressively pursuing 123 agreements. Could you explain what 123 agreements are and why they are important for the underlying objectives of these executive orders? Ina, please.
Thank you, Zaf. And thank you, Colleen, for already starting my answer. So the 123 agreements, as Colleen mentioned, are named so colloquially after the Section 123 of the Atomic Energy Act of 1954, but I will go a little bit further and say they're as essential as 123 for the peaceful nuclear cooperation between the US industry and industries in other parts of the world. And to be clear, the 123 agreements are bilateral agreements between governments. So it would be US government, usually led by the State Department, Secretary of State, in collaboration with DOE, Department of Energy, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, that would be leading the effort in concluding these agreements with other countries. But these agreements are essential prerequisites for the US industry to really share certain kinds of nuclear materials, nuclear technology with these partners in other countries. And the reason they are so essential as part of the a very long-standing policy of the United States for promoting non-proliferation and nuclear security, physical protection of these materials and facilities is that these agreements establish legally binding obligations on the part of the international partners of the countries to make sure that there are safeguards in place, there's a physical protection of this material in place, and they also prohibit retransfer of any of these nuclear exports to a nation that is not a party to a 123 agreement. So it's not like a country can sort of not conclude it, but still get that US nuclear export from another place. So the 123 agreements cover really a wide range of nuclear technology, materials, and activities involving nuclear materials and nuclear technology. And they are required for the export of certain nuclear commodities related related commodities under the NRC export rules. And so there are limited exceptions to this mandate, and it may be possible to do certain nuclear exports, but under the authorities of Part A10 administered by the Department of Energy. But those still require, even under that authorization, it's still a criteria for those countries to be party to the 123 agreements, or the criteria that's similar to the same legal obligations as the 123 agreements. And so, as Colleen sort of mentioned earlier, these 123 agreements are essential for expanding the markets for the US industry, for making sure that these opportunities exist for the US industry. And by mandating this aggressive pursuit of 20 new agreements, which almost doubles, because currently we have about 23, with 23 agreements with about 23 countries or so. And these would be plus renegotiation of existing agreements. This order seems to aims at expanding this nuclear market for the U.S. industry partners to make sure that they can access these additional partners in the other parts of the world. And we are already seeing the momentum arise. With Malaysia has just concluded that MOU as an initial step towards the 123 agreement with the U.S., as well as Bahrain. So we will likely see quite a bit more. We do not know, as per the executive order, which countries are on the priority list. And we certainly have some ideas and look forward to that publication on the Hunton website. But at the moment, we're expecting to see quite a bit more of these kind of MOUs as this precursor step, and then the 123 negotiations to commence.
Thanks, Ina, for providing this clear explanation of 123 agreements and how it fit into the broader strategy and the focus of the current administration to almost double the current 123 agreements. In fact, I conclude with you that in Southeast Asia, following Malaysia, that's Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand, all in the space of I would say the last 24 months, I think. And Indonesia and Vietnam, they have existing 123 agreements already, and I believe they might look to renegotiate. But it is a very interesting outlook in this 123 agreement. Now, if I could bring back Colleen into the discussion. Looking ahead, how might this executive orders influence the global energy transition, in particular balancing nuclear power with the rapid growth of renewables over the next few years? Colleen, please.
Nuclear energy, we see it helping or influencing the global clean energy transition in a way that accelerates it and is complementary to it, particularly with respect to deployment of renewables. Clean energy, whether it's coming from nuclear energy or renewables, we don't believe forces a country to have or to be sitting in an either-or situation where a country needs to choose between baseload clean energy via nuclear or intermittent clean energy from renewables, but rather it is a complementary situation where a country can include both nuclear and renewables in its clean energy plans. And I'll give a little more detail about that. As we know, nuclear energy's continuous baseload power enhances grid stability and resilience, and this in turn will enable greater integration of renewable energy resources. So more specifically, certain SMR and microreactor technologies include an energy storage system in their plant design, and what this enables them to do is to store excess energy and then release it when needed to the grid. So certain of these technologies can increase its power by up to 40%, and it can maintain that level for several hours. This capability has a very practical effect of reducing the risk of power outages during periods of peak renewables generation. So when you've got peak renewables, it can dial it down. These technologies that have the energy storage system, they can dial down their energy. They can also dial it back up to keep that the load on the grid very stable. And also, as is well known, continuous reliable power is critical to supporting developing and growing economies. So factories, hospitals, schools, water systems all rely on a continuous baseload power, and they need that power to be reliable. But the good thing with nuclear is that countries who have already invested in renewables or have plans to do so in the near future don't need to scrap those plans or roll back that investment. They can add the SMRs or microreactor to that clean energy plan and then use that nuclear energy source to stabilize its grid and to complement the renewable energy that's being generated. So, these executive orders, by emphasizing collaboration, as previously discussed with foreign governments via the 123 agreements and trade missions and providing financial support and in other ways, they have the ability to influence the global energy transition in countries that are currently utilizing renewable energy technologies to include nuclear energy in their plans, not only to increase energy capacity, but also from a very practical perspective to stabilize their electricity grids and to protect their past and any planned investments in renewable energy resources.
I agree. Certainly, that's a good take on the role of nuclear in energy mix, Colleen. And it's really exciting to think about how these EOs could potentially shape global trends. Now, turning back to you, Ina, these executive orders also mention other diplomatic initiatives, including the promotion of the Convention on the Supplementary Compensation on Nuclear Damage, better known as CSC. That's a mouthful, so I guess you don't have to repeat it again, Ina.
No, I will not. You said it, I don't have to repeat it.
So could you tell us what the CSA is and why it is significant in the context of expanding nuclear energy, both at home and abroad? Ina, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Zaf. And I think I like the way you phrase it in terms of the trends. And I think the CSC, this mention of CSC in the executive orders and this emphasis on CSC in the executive orders essentially does the same thing as the 123 agreements. It aims to open up the global market opportunities for the US industry to engage with the rest of the world. And so the way CSC operates to do that is that it aims to establish this worldwide system of civil liability and supplementary compensation for nuclear damage, in which all states may participate. So right now, there are about a handful of conventions on nuclear liability. There's the Vienna Convention, the Paris Convention, the various protocols to amend both. There's a protocol that joins the two conventions to make sure that applicability of contracting parties of both can utilize it, and there's of course the Brussels Convention, but the current regime is a little bit of a like a patchwork quilt, as Steve McIntosh calls it, and it's which means there's some gaps in this global regime. So what all of these conventions do, and the reason why this CSC is important, is that they allow for they establish this special legal regime for civil liability for nuclear, in case nuclear damage is suffered as a result of a nuclear incident at a nuclear installation. And it is also kind of a mouthful to say all of these terms, but they are really specific terms utilized across the conventions and defined fairly consistently in the same way across the conventions as well. And the reason it is contemplated and deliberately done so is to make sure that the civil liability regime is limited in its application. And because it channels that liability, essentially the compensation, the need to provide that compensation to the operator or the license holder of that nuclear installation. And currently, because of that patchwork kind of a regime, there are some gaps in the applications of these conventions. So what the CSC is aiming to do is establish this framework where everywhere, whatever the nuclear damage may be suffered, the conventions work in a way that that liability is still channeled to the operator. Now, what it means for the U.S. industry in the practical terms is that the U.S. industry may engage with whatever international partner in whatever state and still be protected. So it may be a supply chain, they may partner, or it may be a lending institution or equity or debt provider kind of institution. So, and they would be protected against that civil liability, against essentially providing that compensation, because it would be channeled to the operator. So in a sense, it does basically the same thing as the 1, 2, 3 agreements, and it's a very, I would say, holistic approach in that sense, is that it just aims to open up these opportunities for the U.S. industry in a way that protects the U.S. industry, and whether it's supply chains or industry partners or lending institutions, but at the same time allows them to basically compete on global markets with other strategic participants.
Thank you, Ina. I guess that really underscores the importance of national frameworks in supporting nuclear expansion. We've been having a really interesting discussion thus far. Now, to put all these pieces together and to wrap it up, I would like to bring George back into the conversation. George, the global nuclear market is highly competitive. How might the US leverage these executive orders to gain a competitive edge in this space? George, please.
Yes. Indeed, it is a very competitive market, and we have the traditional nuclear exporters, which are Russia and Korea, Japan, and now that we have the emergence of China as well as being a major nuclear technology exporter. So I think that this has the capacity of reinvigorating the U.S. nuclear industry and its global standing in a few ways. First of all, it's that demonstration in the domestic nuclear program that the U.S. is capable of building reactors, and two types of reactors: the large nuclear reactors, because the executive's order can support the development of large nuclear reactors, the existing technologies, but also the demonstration of the concepts on these small modular reactors and advanced reactors, to which the United States has paid a lot of attention and made a lot of investment. A lot of new companies here are coming with new technologies, new concepts, and having a project that actually has been constructed and operated in the United States is going to help with the global exports. On top of that, if you look at the licensing issues that we have in the United States with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, this is the executive orders are envisioning a more streamlined approach for these for the licensing, which of course is going to help the domestic nuclear industry, but also is going to be able to support the global exports of these same technologies, because they're going to be based on a streamlined regulatory approach from the United States and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. As 𝘰𝘂 and Colleen were mentioning before, of course, there's the other component, the international component, the direct component, which comes with the 123 agreements, the CSC, which is providing in the financing, US EXIM and DFC financing, which basically are elements to support the experts. The thing that has always distinguished the US nuclear market, the US nuclear exporters, is that the companies that are doing the nuclear energy providers are private companies, as compared to companies in other places like France or Korea, China and Russia, which there's a lot of state ownership in these nuclear technology exporters. So by having this whole of government approach, where yes, they are led by the nuclear industry, but at the same time, they're coming in with a partnership from the government in terms of civil nuclear liability, licensing support, 123 agreements, and then financing support. It's going to enable the U.S. nuclear experts to rely on a package that's going to be able to be very competitive when they're approaching the international marketplace. So overall, I think that all these components are going to be able to put the U.S. again in a very strong position to demonstrate that it has the capability to support its domestic nuclear program, and through that to also show that it's going to be very much invested in the international marketplace.
Fantastic, fantastic. That's indeed a very compelling vision for U.S. leadership in the nuclear sector, George. It is clear that this executive's orders could indeed reshape the competitive landscape, or at least give the US an edge, or at the very least level the playing field with traditional players like Russia, Korea, Japan. Now we've come to an end of this interview. It's been a really fascinating discussion. I would like to express my sincere appreciation to George, to 𝘰𝘂, to Colleen for sharing your expertise and insights on the international implication of these US executives' orders. This has indeed been an interesting discussion on the opportunities of partnerships and diplomatic efforts that could drive nuclear energy globally forward. To our audience, thank you for joining us on this episode of NBP Hot Seat. Stay tuned for more conversation shaping the future of nuclear energy. I'm 𝘧𝘰𝘴𝘵, and we'll see you the next time. Thank you once again, George, 𝘰𝘂, Colleen. Take care. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.